Kiddushin 75a. Anyone whose daughter you may marry his widow. If a priest is permitted to marry someone's daughter, he is likewise permitted to marry that person's widow. She has not become disqualified to marry a priest by having engaged in sexual intercourse with her husband. And anyone whose daughter you may not marry his widow either. The Gemara asks, what difference is there between the first Tana of the Mishnah and Rabbi Yossi, as they appear to be saying the same thing? Rabbi Yochanan says the practical difference between them concerns a Jewish woman who engaged in intercourse with a second-generation Egyptian. The Torah prohibits Egyptian converts and their children from entering into the congregation by marriage, but the grandchildren of the Egyptian convert, in other words, the third generation, are permitted to marry Jews with unflawed lineage. And both of them learned their respective opinions only from the halacha of a high priest who engaged in intercourse with a widow, although they derived the halacha in different ways. How so? As the first Tana holds that this case is like that of a high priest who engages in sexual intercourse with a widow. Just as with regard to a high priest who engages in intercourse with a widow, his act of intercourse with her is performed by means of a transgression, and he disqualifies her from marrying into the priesthood, so too, anyone whose act of intercourse is by means of a transgression, such as a second-generation Egyptian who engages in intercourse with a Jewish woman, likewise disqualifies her from marrying into the priesthood. And Rabbi Yossi holds that the derivation is as follows. It is like a high priest who engages in sexual intercourse with a widow, just as with regard to a high priest who engages in intercourse with a widow whose offspring is unfit for the priesthood, as they have the status of a halal, and he similarly disqualifies her from marrying a priest by engaging in intercourse with her, so too anyone whose offspring is unfit for the priesthood also disqualifies her from marrying a priest by engaging in intercourse with her. This comparison serves to exclude a second-generation Egyptian, whose offspring is not unfit, as the verse states, the children of the third generation that are born to them may enter into the congregation of the Lord. Deuteronomy 23, verse 9. Therefore, a second-generation Egyptian does not disqualify a woman with whom he engages in intercourse from marrying a priest. The Brisa also taught that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, anyone whose daughter you may marry his widow. And anyone whose daughter you may not marry his widow either. The Gemara asks, what difference is there between the opinions of Rabbi Yossi and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? They seem to be stating the same halacha. Ula said, the difference between them involves a male Ammonite convert and a male Moabite convert. According to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, male Ammonite and Moabite converts disqualify a woman with whom they engage in sexual intercourse from marrying a priest, whereas Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that they do not disqualify her. And both of them learned their respective opinions only from the halacha of a high priest who engaged in intercourse with a widow, although they derived the halacha in different ways. How so? As Rabbi Yossi holds that this case is like that of a high priest who engages in intercourse with a widow, just as with regard to a high priest who engages in sexual intercourse with a widow, the halacha is that his offspring are unfit for the priesthood as they have the status of a halal, and he similarly disqualifies her from marrying a priest by engaging in intercourse with her. So too, anyone whose offspring is unfit for the priesthood, including a male Ammonite or Moabite convert, also disqualifies her from marrying a priest by engaging in intercourse with her. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds that the derivation is as follows. It is like a high priest who engages in sexual intercourse with a widow, just as with regard to a high priest who engages in intercourse with a widow, as all his offspring are unfit, the females as well as the males, and he disqualifies her by engaging in intercourse with her, so too, anyone about whom the halacha is that all his offspring are unfit, even the females, disqualifies a woman with whom he engages in intercourse from marrying a priest. This comparison serves to exclude a male Ammonite or Moabite convert, as the females born to them are fit to enter into the congregation. As the Master said, an Ammonite man is prohibited from entering into the congregation, but not an Ammonite woman. Similarly, a Moabite man is prohibited from doing so, but not a Moabite woman. Rav Chisda says, all concede with regard to a widow of questionable lineage. In other words, a widow whose husband was possibly a halal, that she is unfit to marry into the priesthood. The Gemara explains who is the most lenient of these Tanaim. It is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and he says, anyone whose daughter you may marry his widow, and anyone whose daughter you may not marry his widow either. He said the latter clause to exclude what? It is to exclude a widow of questionable lineage, and it teaches that she is unfit to marry into the priesthood, since the daughter of one who was possibly a halal is prohibited from marrying a priest. The Gemara comments, this statement of Rav Chisda serves to exclude the opinion of these following Tanaim. As we learned in a Mishnah in Eduyot 8.3, Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera testified with regard to a widow of questionable lineage that she is fit to marry into the priesthood. What is the reason for this lenient ruling? It is a case of compound uncertainty, and the principle is that in a case of compound uncertainty, the ruling is to be lenient. The Mishnah teaches that according to Rabbi Eliezer, it is permitted for those with definite flaws to marry with those with definite flaws. For example, it is permitted for Mamzerim and Gibeonites to marry each other. By contrast, it is prohibited for those with definite flaws to marry those with whose flaws result from an uncertainty, and it is also prohibited for those whose flaws result from an uncertainty to marry those whose flaws result from an uncertainty. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Yehuda added, when I said that halacha in front of Shmuel, he said to me, Hillel the elder teaches the Mishnah as stating, Jews with 10 types of lineage ascended from Babylonia, and all of them, in other words, all those who may not enter into the congregation, even those whose flaws result from an uncertainty, are permitted to marry into each other's families. And you said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer? The Gemara comments, and a contradiction can be raised from this statement of Rav against another statement of Rav, and similarly, a contradiction can be raised from this statement of Shmuel against another statement of Shmuel, as it was stated that they had the following dispute with regard to a betrothed woman who became pregnant during her period of betrothal, and it is unknown whether it was her betrothed or someone else who impregnated her. Rav says that the offspring is a mamzer. The assumption is that she was impregnated by a different man, and that the child is the offspring of a betrothed woman and a man other than her betrothed. And Shmuel says the offspring is a shetuki. Since there is no proof that it is a mamzer, she might have been impregnated by her husband. The Gemara explains their respective opinions. Rav says the offspring is a mamzer and is therefore permitted to marry a mamzeret. And Shmuel says the offspring is a shetuki and is prohibited to marry mamzeret. It is seen here that Shmuel prohibits one whose flaw results from an uncertainty from marrying one with definite mamzer status, whereas Rav permits such a person to marry one with definite mamzer status. This contradicts their earlier statements in which Rav prohibited one whose flaw results from an uncertainty from marrying one with definite mamzer status, and Shmuel permitted it. The Gemara answers, reverse the opinions in this dispute, so that Rav is the one who says the offspring is a shituki and is prohibited to marry a mamzeret, and Shmuel says the offspring is a mamzer and he may marry a mamzeret. The Gemara asks, if so, why do I need two instances of the same dispute? The Gemara answers, it is necessary to state the dispute twice, because if it were stated only with regard to the Mishnah, which discusses an unmarried woman whose offspring is a shituki, one could have said it was with regard to that case that Rav states his opinion, but the majority are fit with regard to her, and only a minority of men are those who are forbidden to her, and relatives are those who are disqualified from entering into the congregation. But there, in the case of a betrothed woman who became pregnant, where the majority are unfit with regard to her, and she is forbidden to everyone other than her betrothed, one might say that Rav concedes to Shmuel that her child is a definite mamzer. And conversely, if it was stated that only in this case of a betrothed woman, one could have said it was with regard to this case that Rav states the offspring is a shituki, because it is most reasonable to ascribe the pregnancy to the betrothed man, which would mean that the offspring is not a mamzer. But in that case of an unmarried woman, one might say that he agrees with Shmuel that the child is considered to be a definite mamzer. It is therefore necessary to state both cases. And if you wish, say, actually do not reverse the opinions. And what is the meaning of the term mamzer that Rav is saying? It does not signify that this offspring is permitted to marry a mamzer, but merely that he is prohibited from marrying a Jewish woman. And when Shmuel says the offspring is a shituki, he meant that he is prohibited from marrying a Jewish woman. The Gemara asks, if so, that is the same as Rav. Rather, what is the meaning of the term shituki in Shmuel's statement? It is that one silences him, disqualifies him from the halacha of the priesthood. In other words, even if the betrothed man was a priest, the child is not considered a priest. The Gemara questions this. Isn't it obvious? Now, if one silences him from the halacha of a Jew, from the halacha of a priesthood, it is necessary to say that he is silenced from the halacha of priesthood. Rather, what is the meaning of shituki? The one that silences him from his father's property. It is obvious. Do we know who the father is? No, it is necessary in a case where the son seized possession of the property of the man. And if you wish, say, what shituki? It means beduki, meaning they examine the mother, and she says, I engaged in sexual intercourse with a man of unfalled lineage. She is deemed credible. In accordance with whose opinion is this halacha? Is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel? But didn't Shmuel say that once, as we learned, if an unmarried woman was pregnant and people said to her, what is the status of the fetus? She said to them, it's from so-and-so, and he said, he is a priest. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer say, she is deemed credible. Rabbi Yehoshua says, she is not deemed credible. And Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel. It is necessary, as if from here I would say there the majority are fit with regard to her, but here the majority are unfit with regard to her, you might say not necessary. It is taught in the Brisa, and similarly Rabbi Elazar says a Samaritan may not marry a Samaritan woman. What is the reason? Rabbi Yosef said, established him like the descendant of a convert after 10 generations, as it is taught with regard to the descendant of a convert, he is permitted to marry mamzeret with 10 generations. From this forward, prohibited from a mamzeret. And some say, until the name of idol worship is forgotten from him. Abaye said, to Rav Yosef is comparable there, an old convert, and she is a new mamzeret. People who see him marrying a mamzeret will say a Jewish man is marrying a mamzeret. Here, this and that, the two Samaritans are the same each other. Rather, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Israel, he said, Rav Elazar holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael.